only thing to prove it's our land, it's by our skin color. We are the natives of this place, and then when they came, they took what is ours, they owned what is ours, and when they finally saw that the mind of the oppressed can actually think far apart from the oppression, but in a circle whereby we have to think of what they think our capabilities are. And then when one of our heroes, some of our heroes who knew how to use their mind, only wanted one thing: freedom for a black person. Not freedom as in me being able to talk to a white person, not freedom as me going to a white population where it's all about them and asking for permission to be there. Not me sitting in the same desk and going to the same channel to the white person doesn't mean that I'm free. It only means that I'm brainwashed into thinking that I'm free.
I see.
And freedom, the freedom that our heroes, Abo Robert Sobukwe, Abo Bantu Biko, they only fought for the land. The freedom which they had in mind was one that a black person must have what is rightfully theirs.
Ms. Sandy? You're muted. You're muted. Ms. Sandy, we can't hear you. You are muted. Thank you.
Did you hear when I asked if you could play the rest of the clip so that we hear the song? Because the song is very much part of this conversation. Are you able to just go back to the song, Bali?
Okay.
And goes. Thank you so much. Sanbona nonke, mulwe nonke, good afternoon. My name is Zandi Khatebe. I go by Nehanda on the WhatsApp group. Basically, I will keep my introduction short, precisely because I think part of this conversation is ongoing, and most of it will be delivered by the two guests. Perhaps I think the only thing that I want to bring forward is that this conversation, this topic, the land issue, is a very emotive issue, both in the classroom but also outside the university space. The young lady that you saw in that video was in grade 10 when she did that interview. Let me just give a bit of context. So part of my work, I am a community activist. I teach children Black consciousness, Pan-Africanism, and to us, Black consciousness and Pan-Africanism are two sides of the same coin. You can never talk about Sobukwe without talking about Steve Biko. So instead of dividing the two, we tend to match them because there could never be a Biko if there was not a Sobukwe. And so what had happened that afternoon was that we visited a farm, and on the part of the farm that we had visited, there was a dam, but the dam was shared between the plot that we were visiting and the plot next door. And so, of course, we let the children to wander off just to enjoy space, because these are children who come from Soweto, where we are not used to just seeing space upon space upon space, you know. So we had gone for an afternoon walk, and I think I sat down in one corner and just allowed the students to be. And they obviously walk towards, you know, the part of the dam that didn't belong on this side of the plot. And on that part, there was a white family. And they didn't take kindly to, you know, the children just, you know, moving into their space. And instead of perhaps trying to explain what was happening in terms of the demarcations that, to us as Abantu are not there. They were just rude, they insulted the children, and it was a very emotional day. But perhaps we decided that we want to turn that moment into a learning moment. And so I did that interview with the children. The interesting thing there is that there were 3 of them, our most senior students in that group. Only the girl was brave enough to talk. The 2 younger brothers were so emotional. And this was back in possibly 2015, 2014. So it's a very old video. And I hope you were able to just understand what it is that we are trying to do when we firstly bring the land question into the university curriculum, whereby we are teaching both, children who come from white, the white side of life, children whose parents are somehow responsible for some of these violences that Black people in general experience. So it's a very contested space, even when we talk about the idea of ownership, because what had happened there was that those young people were experiencing the violence of the land being defined, from a colonial notion of ownership, whereby there's a demarcation, you cannot go here, this is mine, this is yours, keep to yourself. And so I hope this conversation, or rather that small clip by that young lady, will open up, your own thoughts around this conversation. And please, my Africa, please, comrades, let us engage our speakers, let us be vocal. You will not be marked down for speaking your truth. We are trying to decolonize, we are trying to journey together, and it doesn't have to be an easy road, but it's a necessary road. Bali, thank you so much. I would like to stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Sandy, for that introduction. And yes, indeed, we're looking forward to this conversation, and we hope that the video has sparked some thinking, and also we are probably, I'm assuming that most of us are just boiling inside, and we want to learn more from our guests, and also we want to say more. Thank you to everyone who has introduced themselves, and it's just also interesting that we all come from different spaces within this country and also outside, and we've had different relationships with the land itself. And I know, like, for people who are from Soweto, like myself, we don't really have a very interpersonal relationship with land, and the awareness of land even, it's almost like we are existing on land, but we don't really know what it means, what it stands for, or what it's supposed to give to us, or how we are supposed to give to it. So I would like to just open the official discussion, and we'll introduce our guests. We'll start with Elder Mabule Mokhine. So our elder is a mathematics and science tutor whose approach builds from an appreciative inquiry that is vested in helping learners understand the concept from a human relation. He is a custodian at the Greenhouse Project, a working demonstration community and information center on sustainable living and environmental sustainability. In his praxis, Elder Mabule draws from the Black consciousness and Pan-African school of thought. There's he plays a role of a group process facilitator at several community Black consciousness Pan-Africanist organization, among which are Black House Collective and Ebukosini Solutions. So our elder here will be just giving us the context of or the meaning of land from a Afrocentric perspective, and also just looking into how land is connected to us is for the living and the non-living and those who are yet to be born. So Ntate Rahamukela, to our program, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining in. Now the floor is yours. Thank you. You're muted, Ntate.
Let me check the sound. Am I coming through well? Can you hear?
We can hear you, but please just shift the mic a bit from your mouth so that the sound does not No, you can still have it, but say something.
Greetings,
Great.
greetings. Thank you. I'm going to take a cue in my greetings from several voices that came through to introduce myself as Mabule Madiklogwana, Wabu Mokhine Mulibedi, Yamahatimana Buskakani, Boma, Boma, Gamchele, Natule Zimasi. So for those of you who are able to connect with a greeting from that space, you would then understand that it's a full greeting. Yes, maybe let me give a brief background to how I come to this space from the work that I've been doing for the past 30 years or so. I'm born, raised, and I'm still living in Diepkloof, Soweto. Studied up to what is now grade 8. Yes, that's standard 10. The former, what is it, grading system. And then got an opportunity to study a further 2 years of what they call a 2-year matric program in King Williamstown as a science student, and then went to the University of Cape Town, where I was studying towards applied mathematics and physics. However, life would have its own call, and I couldn't proceed with the studies further on. But at that point, I had begun to realize that there was something that I was completely disconnected with, and it was with the reality and the circumstance that I was born, raised, and still currently in. And that prompted me with a fellow student at UCT to start Saturday classes as an outreach for learners in Khayelitsha. Please bear with me. That awareness for me was particularly important because not only was the experience of being at varsity dislocating, but it was almost like a door opening, for one to reconnect. And then when I came back to Johannesburg, I continued with reaching out to learners, particularly in the science and mathematics areas of study. I still continue to do that for particularly grade 8 through to first year mathematics and science, including for those who are doing engineering. And as if that was not enough, I then realized that I need to connect with something bigger than just, a need in the community, and something bigger than just a need in the community. Took me first to just simply doing gardening, and that tuned me into the state of how we treat the land spaces in the hard ground, especially with dumping and littering, which is still very much a problem. Suffice to say that the bulk of that problem, of course, we experience it in the community in the forms of litter and dumping. But the bulk of it is still very much industrial effluents and industrially designed products that are designed for one's own use and then disposal. Now, herein lies, the connection with the bigger, reality. And the bigger reality through my work, first with Earth Life Africa, which still remains largely focused on advocacy and lobbying around environmental sustainability related legislation and policy. I was exposed to some of the systemic challenges to man reconnecting with land and land in its totality. So oftentimes as human beings, we are centered on the land as a point of reference. And unfortunately, for the majority of us human beings, that point of reference is the hard ground. Yeah, for a few communities in the world, the point of reference is, the waters. If you look at the Asia Pacific um, and the Eastern Pacific of, the world or the earth, people still, build on lagoons, meaning water catchment areas closest to the sea or just, offshore the sea. And that awareness of the systemic challenge drew me closer to appreciating that life systems, are cyclical. They're not only cyclical in terms of time and seasons, day and night, but also cyclical in terms of biorhythms and ages. So when I talk about biorhythms, is that because we've been so disconnected with the fullness of the land, as the waters, the mountains, the hard ground as the terrain, the trees, including the skies, the heavens, the cosmos, which were it not of man's awareness and connection with the cosmos or the skies, I doubt would have as much a refined sense of, time. Time in its multiplicity, time as in day and night, time as in seasons, time as in age, and when I talk about age, that's where you then begin to draw a lot of insight into astrology. According to the Gregorian calendar, we're supposed to be in the Aquarian age. But if you look at other time references, i.e. Kemetic calendar, the Ethiopian calendar, and if I'm not wrong, the Chinese calendar, we are only getting into the Aquarian age. And so what that speaks to is that there was some readjustment of the calendar by the Romans, which actually fast forwarded, the age to Pisces when we are only getting out of Pisces into the Aquarian age. Of course, for those who read time from, you know, prophecy, the science of the time, will vouch for the fact that, yeah, if we were already in the Aquarian age, we wouldn't be going through, what we are going through politically, economically, socially, in terms of the fragmentation that we see, right? Through institutions and the most foundational institution, which is the family. Now, having said that, the relationship that I have become more and more, aware of and drawn a lot of inspiration from is how, our state of existence as colored by colonialization, which state is what now we know it's coloniality, the aftermath of generational oppression, which came through, colonization. It's that our connection with or disconnect with who we are insofar as we experience our, lived realities or reality. It's that we have been framed into a linear system of, doing things and experiencing life. Yes, of course, some people will say, but the cyclical, doesn't have an end, it doesn't have a beginning. Now, we can go a bit into the philosophy of the cyclical forms to appreciate that, with the cyclical systems, where it ends, it begins. However, with the linear system, where it starts, and where it ends, they can be diametrically opposite, and that answers for why we have, we have a lot of industrially processed products, for example, plastic cans, going into the landfill. And that speaks to a lack of awareness and disconnect with the cyclical nature of how, life is organized. And we are supposed to be that. So it's almost like the objectification of, the earth by human beings has resulted in a system that has broken the connection between man and, his or her oneness with the earth. So when I speak about the earth, I speak about the totality of that experience insofar as, I reference it to men or to, human beings. And that totality includes the experience of space, either on land, space, on the, along the seashore, space as the sky, and that all of those spaces, including the space that land is, are living spaces. So each one of those is made up of many circular systems and subsystems that actually provide, for each other's well-being. So there is a complementarity that comes with cyclical systems as opposed to linear systems. So that's the first thing that I was immediately drawn to, that unless we are aware of this and therefore the need for a systemic change that reconnects us with the totality of our being, will be forever, moving to an end that is catastrophic, mainly for men. I doubt for nature. Nature can take care of itself without man's, adverse impact on it. Yes, that may take time, but living systems have a way of rebuilding themselves. And whether men will be part of that or not, or whomever survives, will be fortunate enough to see, the rekindling of cyclical systems. The second thing that I've often been drawn to is how knowledge, and maybe let me premise this first with this. All struggles for liberation are struggles for, decoloniality. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I mean, pre the European or Western colonial, imposition, some historians argue that yes, Africans did colonize, or Black people, for that matter, did colonize the world. And however, their colonization was not a colonization that was premised on oppression and superiority. It was premised on, humanity. Whereas colonization, as we experience it, post, not even post, because we're still in that era of the Roman conquest, and evolving to the into the what we call a Great Britain and axis. It's an evolution that stems, from an erasure of, human relations that sought the highest form of self-fulfillment and actualization to a form that, at first assuming superiority, basically forced colonialization that was driven and cut very much on oppression and exploitation to advance, its cause. So all forms of liberation have been forms of decolonization. Maybe let me also draw a point, just to bring an awareness on this piece of history. Um, prior to the founding of Greece as a state, the Athenians and the Spartans are known to have been at war forever, until there were a few overtures from some of the Greeks, particularly the Athenians, approaching Kemet, for studies. And as is documented by some of the historians, there was a what I would call a great debate whether they should be allowed or not allowed, and eventually it was agreed that they should be allowed. And then so the coming through of Athenians to Africa and Kemet to study did shed some light, which eventually raised another important question that for as long as there is instability in that part of the region, which geographically is closest to Kemet, the Commissions or North Africans would still be, troubled. And so the founding of Greece as a state, it's a process that took, black people to intervene and help build what became the state of Greece. Perhaps not as we know it now, but the formation and the founding of Greece as a state, it's largely as a result of interventions by, Africans. Now, one would say, well, maybe that was also a colonization. Yes, it was a colonization, but it was a colonization that advanced stability, political stability, social stability, economic self-realization of, parties that eventually found truce and became one state. Now, with the collapse of Greece and the takeover by Rome, a lot of people would know, especially of European descent, that the Roman Empire, imposed, a a doctrine of Catholicism that made everyone else, non-Catholic, and therefore stateless, except insofar as inputs of labor, leading up to a formalization of what became serfdoms, the serfs, and the landowners and the aristocrats. And were it not of that colonization of Europe, which of course is preceded by, the movement of the Germanic tribes, Vikings, and all of those, there wouldn't have been, what we now learn in religious terms as Protestants and Catholics, and that division speaks to, a struggle, for freedom, a struggle for people to be free from one set of thought, which imposed a coloniality of oppression in Europe. Barring to say that, for the rest of humanity, we've lived through, 400 and so years of, that kind of coloniality, and not excluding, the rise of Islam, which also layered, the coloniality of oppression on the majority of the peoples of the world, on the back of a coloniality of Christianity, which leveraged of exploitation of labor, starting with serfs, and then slavery, and then removals of people or dislocation of people from lands. And so when I threw in this banner into the works, I just wanted to broaden our horizon to the fact that the kind of colonization that decoloniality speaks to, it speaks to a colonization of oppression, exploitation, dispossession, and dehumanization, through generations to date. So how does this colonization, advance itself? First, and this is the truth that is often not comfortable for those who would want to see themselves as human. But that colonization advances itself on, a race classification, with the one race being the superior race and the other race is being objectified, to justify, conquest. And of course, I mean, the Catholic Church does decree, right of conquest. So right of conquest justifies, any aristocrat family to actually finance, the takeover of lands by those whom it had actually, been exploiting in Europe, and basically exporting, the challenges that Europe was unable or very short-sighted to solve, amicably within Europe itself, but also collaboratively with other nations that were far ahead, the line of what we call civilization. So the right of conquest gives impetus to, dethronement of kings and taking over of lands and other, nations, and the nexus of that is, racial superiority. But now we know that even with scientific racism, it has never been, scientifically authenticated that, the European race is the superior race. In fact, to the contrary, a history that gives us, voluminous, human experience of how, that racial superiority is in fact the antithesis of its genesis. Now we fast forward and we come to, say, for example, you know, colonization as classically defined, and it starts, interestingly, not as vicious as history would like to make us believe. There are anecdotes, some documented, you find them hidden in literature, of how, when first Europeans arrived, yeah, they were met with, some apprehension. Who are these people? Where are they from? What do they want? But at the bottom of it, how can we help them seeing the state in which they are? And in most instances, they were allocated pieces of land, taught local agriculture, tended to their health challenges, from long sea voyages. For example, scurvy and pellagra and those seaborne conditions, and malnutrition related health conditions. And interestingly, what follows is that in as much as the first Europeans land in foreign lands, they are already also in a study. They have anthropologists, who are studying the culture, breaking the language codes, and beginning to decode what is legitimate to the locals to delegitimize it. And what follows then is your, your missionaries, and your missionaries already, they have a template to work from. And the template is that everything and anything local, it's evil, it's demonic, and um, that is also accompanied by, the magic of, death. And when I say the magic of death, I mean, for example, Native Americans, they are, recorded for referring to, the gun as a fire stick. And and it's not only referred to as a fire stick because of the fire that it produces, but because of the, the consequences of that stick, when it catches fire, what happens next? A full, able-bodied human being that was with you a few minutes or a few seconds, it's no more. And can you imagine the shock of that on the back of, this is demonic, you shall not worship this, you shall not do this, you shall not speak your language, and then with those gains of that form of colonization in other parts of the world, like, for example, Africa, there's some negotiation that begins. And the negotiation, Africans, even though they make gains, they are only buying time. A good example is that some of the, royal families, they actually, begin to take their children into missionary schools reluctantly, knowing that they are buying time and they want to see how this will actually pan out. And sooner than they actually thought, there are divisions within, communities within formerly thriving nations. And I don't want to be romanticizing Africa, but I'm just giving a picture of how colonialization, dislocates people not only from the land, but from from the sense of who they are, their experience of life, and for that matter, our experience of life is spiritual. It's a spiritual experience that we experience, from, through our bodies, so our bodies, are basically a filter through which we experience the spirituality of being. So that dislocation, it's a dislocation that's quite fundamental. It hits first at the heart of who the people are, their identity with themselves, and their identity with all else that makes up their being, nature, land, and land in its totality. But also, very importantly, their relations with one another. And those relations are very important because those relations are founded in family, and it is those relations that go on to build institutions, within societies. Institutions, for example, for passing on knowledge, generational knowledge. And we know that school, as we know that, it's an institution that was imposed. I mean, even in Europe, school is an institution that was imposed. It takes Europe a much longer time, to come into the fold of schooling. There is reluctance, and the reason why eventually there is, a coming through of, um, the laity of Europe to the schooling system is because of the accolades that schooling, brings with. Now, that is not different from how we experience schooling, whether you call it university education or primary education, it is schooling. And now we are quite clear that, the formation and the passing on of experience as knowledge, once it is qualified, it tends to disqualify a whole lot more. A good example is that schooling is mainly, text based, oral based, and where there have been, where there have been aspects of it that seek to complement the text and the order, it would be in the forms of, yes, ma'am.
Would you like us to give you just a few minutes?
I'm still able to control it for now, I'll tell you. How much am I doing for time? I have 45 minutes. I haven't kept my time.
So you have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left, yeah. So let me just whip it to this piece. So the overarching dislocation, I think I've covered it. But then it cascades into, the nuts and bolts of what then becomes political and economic. And the first bits around that is the imposition of tax. And first, I mean, if you read Tom Boyer's Not Yet Uhuru, and this is just one case. I mean, if you go into other communities, they have more or less the same, nuance. So the local villagers are expected to pay a hard tax in the form of red tails. So and there's no going back because colonization, has already encroached. There are people who are now called civilized Amaputuga, and there are people who are called, barbarians because they are not, Christianized. And so the in order to secure and avoid the worst that could happen to them, they go on and they catch mice, rats and mice, to actually, uh, submit as tax. And each household or hut is expected to submit 10 rat tails or 10 mice tails, to the local government. And what happens to the population of rats? The population of rats, becomes, it dwindles, and when it dwindles, the ecosystem it's not balanced, and that imbalance begins to play itself in other ways. But that is not the point I'm going to. The point I'm going to is that then the next layer kicks in, and the next layer is that they have to pay, tax in currency, in monetary currency. In South Africa, particularly amongst Basotho, not Basotho, Bafokeng, the one king decides, I'm going to ship all these boys who have just come out of initiation schools to Gauteng to dig gold and make contributions that will pay the tax. But that fragmentation is followed also then by further fragmentation of the family and family bonds. As if that was not enough, lands that had not fallen into the hands of, the missionaries and the capitalists, their capitalist agencies, as Dutch East Indian Company, British East Indian Company. There were lots of companies. Some of them were companies within companies, of course. These were corporations. So corporations are nothing new, really. They then, impose ownership. And here it's where King Moshoeshoe comes in quite, interesting. So if you white people had it your way, you would actually have to have our cattle and livestock graze in the clouds, And what he meant by that is this notion of owning something that you didn't create, and none of us has created. It's foreign to us. What does it mean? Break it down to us, you know. And so the further and final dislocation of, locals from the land, it's enforced. Now, what this does is that currently colonization around or decoloniality of the land, it speaks basically to sovereigns, and sovereignty speaks to law. And law, if we want to understand it, or law, I mean European descendants who are, um, conversant with the law, they'll tell you about common law. Yeah, so that's common law. Now, what is interesting about common law is almost like it's the same everywhere you go. It's the general sentiment of a people. You know, even though the template feels the same, is the same wherever you go, it's actually in its implementation and appreciation, culturally and otherwise, it's different from place to place. But when it comes to them, the notion of of land over and above custodianship of land, it's something that is peculiar to colonization as we experience it. Now, with that colonization, as if things had not, conquest and right of conquest had not been achieved, it has now gone through, to food, to water, wherein now, uh, communities in the South of America, La Vita Campesina, it's a movement of indigenous communities who actually staged a successful, campaign right up to the United Nations Fora on Sustainable Development around water and land rights. We're able to bring to the fore a global awareness of, how can you privatize water? Yes, you've managed to force your way with land, but how then do you then go forth and privatize water resources? Now we know, I mean, in South Africa, some couple of years back, it was discovered that, in spite of the Western Cape suffering from water shortage because of the cyclical nature of rainfall patterns in the southern part of this continent, there had been a lot of, not a lot of, about 7, privately owned dams that were not releasing water into the water streams. So, long story short, we are now in the age where colonization has not only fragmented families, societies, concentrated its power within institutions that are corporatized, and actually morphed into governments, and we see the levels of corruption not entirely unique to South Africa. It's the history of European colonization or Euro-Western colonization. But we see the modification of food, which in itself, if we talk about it as modification of food, basically say, corporations want to own or privatize seed, privatize food. And that is not something that it's still coming. It's here. We can see with seedless grapes. We can see it with seedless fruit. We can see with the other level of, the struggle around human, immune system. What we see happening first with your HIV, and subsequently a lot of experimentation with your Ebola, SARS, and now COVID. It's colonization, of systems that are in their natural state, cyclical, are able to heal themselves, are able to come back to their form. They're very adaptable, and unfortunately, we are being fast tracked into more and more and more linear systems. And hurrah, there's much talk about the fourth IR. A lot of people are not unpacking what the fourth IR is about. Yes, I'm not against technological advancement, but technological advancement, and there's always been technological advancement, it must be in harmony with life systems, which are cyclical. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Do you perhaps want to have 5 minutes? Because it also felt like you rushed to finishing there. Maybe I can grant you the addition of 5 minutes to just wrap up your talk.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's because I always try to um, maintain my own dislocation in terms of how it plays itself out.
Okay.
Yeah, let me also then add to there are several things that came up as participants were introducing themselves. One is that history is often recorded for past events, but history is memory. And the battle around, you know, the telling of history impartially and giving voice to what is history as experienced by a people, very much resides in the memory. And the memory is continuous. Our memory is not only located in the mind, but it's located in our being. And what I mean by that, you know, we come from a people and we therefore carry, their memory with us, and we are projecting that memory, to future generations. Whether we like it or we do not, it's nothing that has so much to do with us than our awareness of it and how we manage ourselves, with that awareness. It's life, nature, and life is organized in ways that man cannot stand outside of it as the Cartesian model of thinking. I am, I think, therefore I am, prescribed. Life and nature, we are part of it and part of it, we cannot separate ourselves, from how life it's bequeathed to us. And that also extends to our memory of the land. you know. Much of the cry for land, of course, my understanding, over the years is that it's often brought down to the economics. It's more than the economics, you know. It's also, I mean, what economics are we um, presencing ourselves to? Because the economy, as a box, it contains a whole lot of things. It contains uh, the way of doing things, the relations amongst those who are doing things, the needs that have to be met, and why those needs. And, at the bottom of it, it's how people want to self-actualize in terms of, goods and services that they want to produce to meet their needs, but also to actualize. There's also the thought, that when you silence history or distort history, you are also distorting the thought, that should be informed of the memory that is being silenced. And, and consequently, that also distorts, language, as symbolic of how we express our experience. Um, Interestingly, most indigenous languages, tend to be very metaphorical, and that includes, um, you know, um, uh, European languages before the, scientific, the decoupling of the spiritual from the secular, which then gave birth to science, and science basically means knowledge, So we basically are saying, okay, if this was knowledge and it included, spirituality or spiritual experiences, we are going to then shift this and create a box and we call it science. But science is knowledge, and it's knowledge that's often penned down to hard facts. But what are hard facts without, human experience of those hard facts? Yes, that is not barring that. There has always been, a a an awareness of hard facts and empirical facts, of, experience and hard facts. That is not to take away from the, that awareness. Were it not for that case, a lot of history of antiquity, history that built the Indus Valley civilization, in what we now call India, in South Asia Pacific, Vietnam, Cambodia, China, the thousands of black Chinese, in Mesopotamia, the Sumerian, civilization, Kemet, Nubia, Menobotapa, Inzalo Yelanga, as that would be our landmark for the civilization that was prevalent south of, Tropic of Capricorn. We wouldn't have testimony of some of the technological advances that our ancestors made. You talk about the Olmecs in South America, the Confederacy of what gave birth to the United Nations Constitution by the Native Americans, where in 5-year cycles, the Native American nations met and revisited their constitution. So they had an overarching constitution that each nation took with, into their domicile, to enact. So all I'm saying is that yes, there's always been hard facts, but hard facts without experience are the reason why we have knowledge as qualification, that is more text-based rather than experiential based. And that is sad because in South Africa, not so long ago, you had the warrior class who were completely decimated economic-wise and culturally by the Brits, building themselves from experiential learning of apprenticeships, and that experience is very important because it's the experience that gives us the hard facts, and of course we can draw from the hard facts to craft more experience or to go into other experiences, just like the one participant introduced themselves as their field of studies, theory of literature. So Mbali, I think I'm open for questions, unless if there are any.
Baba is a community scholar, Pan-African practitioner. He's also a writer and a speaker and a founding director of Ebukhosini Solutions, a company specializing in African-centered education. His work is focused on the empowerment of African youth, restoration of the Black family, and decolonial capacitation of African communities. He holds a doctoral and master degree in philosophy of education from the University of South Africa. Thank you so much, Baba, for handing over and giving me this opportunity to introduce you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I continue, I think I also would really like to call in the spirits of our ancient queens, our ancient kings, our ancient scientists and healers and warriors, and everyone who brutally was killed, raped, kidnapped, mutilated, dehumanized, blanked out, ridiculed, disrespected, and forgotten in this traumatic experience that we are still living with, and in this meeting we will refer to as coloniality. Greetings again. I will open a presentation, and please let me know if you can see the let me see. Please let me know if you can see the slides, and then I will continue.
Yes, Baba, we can see the slides.
Okay, great. Okay, I wanted to get to, it seems like I have to go through them this way. I'm not sure now. Slideshow, there we go. Okay. So, thank you so much for the introduction, Mbali. I have a lot I want to share, and I know we have time constraints, so let me just get straight into it. I want to share from the point of being a practitioner, somebody whose classroom and office is in the community, out in where people are living and striving and experiencing and working on solutions every single day. For me, coloniality, it's not a study, it's not an academic pursuit, it's not something that I do and write about to sound clever. It's something that I wake up to. I think I even sleep decoloniality, because even during my sleep, I must download dreams and visions for what I must do for and with our people. So just to introduce very quickly who we are. So I'm from an organization called Mokhine Solutions, where our main pursuit is to center or to provide spaces for African-centered education. And don't see classrooms and books only when you hear education. It's learning journeys in the practical life of us as African people in the diversity that we represent. So this means that we bring in many different aspects that I'll just refer to quickly: Black consciousness, African familyhood, Pan-Africanism, decoloniality, African-centered transformation, indigenous, or we should just say African knowledge, and the practice of it. We often refer to that as Africology, which is kind of the fullness of all African knowledge and practice. Through our work, we want to take responsibility. We want to create and make sure that we root our agency in what our people need and what Mama Africa presents to us. And that means that we need to position our will and be intentional, not just during a program or a project or an activity, but 24/7, 365. And that means it's a lifestyle. It means it's what I want to hold myself to in my home, when I'm with my wife, when I'm with my children, where I'm walking down the street, wherever I am. This is what defines me. I'm just showing, I wanted to show pictures more than just, because I hoped that through this, I can also allow the audience or the family members here to connect with the needs, but also the hopes and the realization of the practice. So for us, familyhood is very important, and I'll connect all I'm saying now to land in just a moment. For us, familyhood is really the central organization of African people. And it doesn't just mean mother, father, child. It means people who live within certain spaces, who relate to each other on a daily basis, share resources, and help each other to maneuver through the challenges that life presents. We have a number of knowledgeable people within our spectrum and our spaces who share very willingly from the fountains of knowledge. And what we want to see, and this is what is important for us, to see the practice, see the changes in our homes, see the changes in relationships, see the changes in entrepreneurship, leadership, organizations, seeing the land being used and being grown and being produced, results being produced. Today, and I wanted to show these slides first because the example that I'm going to draw out from the many activities we do is about men. And I didn't want to come across as if I'm only working with men. Mokhine is an organization that focuses on African family, but we also understand that for us to move forward and to understand what decoloniality should mean in a practical sense means that we also sometimes need to group ourselves, and within the broader family see that we have specific forms of oppression and needs that speaks to also the way we can group ourselves. I wanted to just share a few pointers to kind of locate the topic to what I'm about to say. So you can see on the top right there, it says Men on the Mountain. And that's what I want to share with you as an example of how to decolonize land and nature and being. So the decolonial orientation and practice for us is to really remember who we once were and understand how we got into this reality that we now live with, and often think of as normal, and it is anything but that. And then from there, devising, constructing, building, and developing tools and solutions that make us remember where we come from, understand where we are, in order to then create and build and move forward. And as you probably have read quite a lot about in your literature, modernity becomes our enemy, and a very difficult enemy, because modernity is something that we have been instructed to and learned that we should adore, we should want, we should wish. Even within South Africa, we sometimes carry a bit of a chip on our shoulder because we feel that South Africa has certain advancements in technology and infrastructure that not every other African country makes, that makes South Africa better. Very problematic understandings of reality and what is important. A lesson that I think is important to also place in this, I appreciate the scholarship around coloniality and decoloniality. It has opened up an additional way to really center ourselves in our story, and I think that's very important. But I also want us to understand that as African people, decoloniality, it's not rooted necessarily in the fullness of Africa. So we also need to understand our decolonial operations from a distinct African experience. And I think sometimes decoloniality doesn't offer us that fully. So we can use it, but as we use Marxism, as we use a number of other templates that help us to be critical in our thinking and practical in our pursuit, we also need to locate. And that's where African-centeredness comes in. That's where Africology comes in. Decoloniality is a scholarship that in it, a lot of writings have come out of Latin America and Central America. And we obviously have a number of things in common with people who come from that part of the world. But we also see that many of the writers, many of the scholars also carry the skin tones of those who are afforded white privilege in this world. And that also means something in our understanding of what we need to do and how we need to move. So I'm encouraging us as African people to also locate what we do and how we do it in the understanding of our own realities, so that we can be instrumental in our decolonization and decoloniality. Land as power. Land as power teaches me that I'm a student, not a master. It teaches me that I'm a custodian, not a lawmaker. It teaches me that I'm royal, but I'm not God. I'm godly, I'm a representation of God, but I'm not God, her or himself. I represent a collective people who are trying to make the life that life should be about. And that's a very different reality from the one that we live right now. So land reminds me that, yes, I have power to enact, to create, to build, but I'm doing that within a cosmos that also gives me certain regulations that I need to live by. That's very different from the colonial power that we have been marked by, and also learn when we go to institutions of higher learning, when we go out in the work field, that's the colonial power we normally need to use and are expected to represent. Land as knowledge. So land also enables me to remember. As I sink my feet into the soil, something comes back to me, something that was taken away from me. It's an energy of life. I start to understand Ntu, which is the root word of Bantu, Buntu, Muntu, the universal life force, the energy, the rhythm that I need to move with and that I need to be a part of. And that's a knowledge that I don't get credits for in this world. That's a knowledge that I'm not asked to write any exam paper on. That's a knowledge that no interview exists for a job where I need to excel within. And as being, land recreates me. It tells me who I am. It tells me who are we and who are them. And it also gives me purpose. I watch as land is part of a interconnectedness. The rain, the skies, the suns, the seasons, the atmosphere. And I see a tapestry, I see a puzzle, I see a bigger picture of which I want to belong and play a role to complete. That's all I wanted to say about connecting decoloniality to land. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so to share with you why we have a project called Men on the Mountain and what that does and how it relates to what I just said now. And then at the end, as I was preparing for this, one of my colleagues just sent me a poetic rendition that I need to share with you. So I have put that on top of some slides of pictures from men who are in decolonial work. I'll explain that when we get towards the end of the presentation. So Men on the Mountain is a particular invitation to African men to grow up in one day. We also say it's an invitation to come back to self, to return to self. I'll come back to what that means. When men are invited to the mountain, it means that they will start, and this is important, the whole procedure, it's one day. It's very short, and we're not trying to say that this is a full initiation or a full rites of passage. It's an aspect of it, and we are planting it and formulating it in the needs of who we have become now, which is different from how it was before. So this is more an addendum to the so-called traditional initiation. It's an invitation for men to self-reflect, to go deeper within themselves, to also understand that at the root of our self-knowledge as African people, we need to connect with land. So when land has been taken away from us, when land has been put behind fences and bolts and locks, and it's no longer available to us, and over generations, many of our young people have lost the touch of understanding land. They look at land, but they don't see anything than just a physical color or texture. That also means something very fundamental is lost in the African being, something very deep and profound that connects me with spirit, that connects me with my godliness, that connects me with my purpose. So Men on the Mountain is a short experience of what you need to do to reconnect. And it starts with walking on the land, the untouched land, the wilderness land, the land that we often think of as unmanaged. And that is the managed land, because that is actually the land of order. That's where the ecological law is still able to rule and to enable and to create. So to walk on the land, touch the land, catch a breath from climbing the mountains and the lands and the stones and the rocks is a very important part of this. And as men walk, they start to think. And this thinking for a colonial being is a job, it's work, because we have been brainwashed into so many things that do not allow us to think deeply about who we are and who we have become. So to allow ourselves to think in itself is work. It's not free time, it's not off time, it's on time. As men come together and realize and remember just through being in a space with land, they also realize why they need this so much. They also realize what has been lost along the way, who they have become, and how far removed they are from the original self. Drum sounds, chants, songs, dance steps, harmonies, rhythms creates and resonates a foundation that many of us have not felt in a very, very long time. And I'm talking generationally now. As you come to the mountain, you need to introduce yourself. So we have a space where, and this space can differ, we have a space where you introduce yourself. You call your ancestors, you declare your intent, you explain what you are there to do, because you are there to do hard work for a day. Part of the work is listening. Part of the work is being quiet. Part of the work is maybe even fumbling with having a response or knowing what to think, because now you are really shaking up all the layers that not only you, but even those you come from in your lineage have internalized and become. You introduce yourself to the mountain. You need to receive a welcome and a cleansing from the mountain. You need to declare you need to go through your intuitive consciousness. You need to reconnect with aspects of yourself that have laid dormant for a long time. You announce your intent, you declare your purpose, and you also get to engage in a contextual consciousness. And this is where we start the whole process, remembering why we need to do this work. Remember why we need to do it now, and remembering how we need to do it in this time, because we no more living the lives that were lived at the time where some of the cultural institutions that we are taught were crafted and built into us. So we also need to infuse the realities of what we now carry, what we now are confused about, what we now need, into institutions that in their origins may not have had that as their curriculum. So this is where we deepen our understanding of who we have become through our families, through our schooling systems, through the political exploitation that we experience on a daily basis, through the borders of this beautiful Mama Africa that has separated us and made us think of ourselves as different, as a family that no longer is united, of leadership and what kind of leadership we have been expected to perform and what we actually feel we can measure up to do. The healer within us that may still be gasping for air because that healer has not been nurtured for centuries. And this is the contextual consciousness I'm talking about, understanding why I feel the way I do, understand my anxiety, understand my anger, understand why I find life so stressful, find out why I want to vent and shout, and I often feel emotionally down. And as we do that, as you can see, I'm often sharing this platform with my beloved colleague, Mabule Mokhine, who does an incredible sharing in this space of Men on the Mountain as well. And part of this consciousness that I'm talking about is also remembering the African woman and understanding the African woman. And you may ask, why are you talking about understanding the African woman? She's not even there. What does that even mean? And what it means is that within my psychology and the layers of my being as an African man, I need to reach that point where I saw myself as unified with the African woman, because coloniality has taught me that she is not me. She is definitely the opposite of me, and often she is my enemy. That's what I've been taught. That's what I've been brainwashed into thinking. And the violence that we then see that some of us vent towards the African woman is not just about my dislocation and my misunderstanding of self. It is also how I have not been able to deal with all these colonial lessons that were crafted into my being. So understanding that, remembering that, opening that up is a very important part of this work. Also understanding who we once were, let me just dwell a little bit on this slide because I want to come to some of the outcomes. How we understood our purpose as African people, as African men, and understanding that African manhood is not just an opposite, it's not an opposite to African womanhood. It's a symbiotic relationship of being part of, learning from, being guided by the African woman. And land teaches me that because land practices that. I see that if I take in how nature operates, how the soil works around stones, how the trees get leaves, how leaves fall off, how nature dies and come to life again, restarts, rebirths itself. That's how I also need to learn to understand and rebirth myself as an African man, in tandem with, in a dance and a rhythm and a flow with the African woman. Also do what we call decolonial surgery, and that's really dealing with the violence of being that I as an African man have endured, whether it is in my own particular experience or whether it's through my uncles, through my brothers, through my father, through the generations that I come. And getting to understand my colonial wound, where it comes from, why I often ignore it and may even deny it, and what I can do to acknowledge it, and what I can do to begin a process towards healing. We get to hear elders' wisdom, voices, values, sentiments that speaks to our long journey as the first people of this planet. We also, young men also get to ask questions, and this is very important because a lot of men walk around having many questions and they don't know where to ask. And we haven't really set up many spaces for African men to be in a question mode, apart from maybe intellectual questioning, political questioning, business-oriented questioning. But self-questioning, it even seems a bit odd and weak for a man to ask these questions, yet all of us have them. We also have processes, which I'm not going to go into here because it's an experiential learning, and it's something that is done in the moment of how you also download and relate to the spiritual sanctity of the place. But there's also something we call shedding boyhood or shedding immaturities. There's something you need to leave behind on the mountain. There's something you need to no longer do. There's something that you need to do differently. And that's the commitment you make on the mountain. And as you walk down from the mountain, you understand that you have now made a promise to the mountain. And the mountain represents the sacred. The mountain represents the greatness, the hidden mystic powers. It represents strength. It represents the powers that I may not always be able to articulate with my voice, but I can feel through my skin, through my heart, through my blood, through my just walking and being. The wilderness and order, how they coexist, and how order is not always symmetrical. Order is not ways of taking over and pushing aside, but to actually allow to be. And that's a very different understanding of order than the one that we have when we are being brainwashed into. The mountain ordains, it enables, and it equips. And this is what African men download as they are on the mountain and come back to practice. As they come back, they then do a report back to the community. We have community members receiving them. This is an immersion process where they are being received and being reminded what is expected from them. And they also declare what they are now willing to do for the community, for the family, for themselves. So that returning to self, we could call that a way to re-enter the world, which is defined by exploitative modernity with tools, knowledge of self, aspiration of permanent warriorhood, healing and building. So it's a reposition, and it then takes us back to Ntu, as I was mentioning, NTU, Ntu, the universal life force, the energy, the rhythm. As I'm living every single day as a warrior, as a healer, as a builder, it repositions what I'm here to do and how I manage myself. I will show a few slides with just a few feedbacks from men who have gone to the mountain. We have been doing this for the last 10 years, and we are opening up another one now next month. So those of you who are interested, you will let us know and we'll send you the invitation. This is what some of the men have said. This was my first experience of having an honest conversation without taboos about sex, with intelligence and wisdom. Again, I want you to see how this connects to land and agricultural rhythms of seeding, of blossoming, of harvesting. As someone who has had many girlfriends, cheated and hurt many women, this was very meaningful. It made me understand why I have done all of this and what kind of man I now want to become. I saw myself as having much experience, but on the mountain, I realized how little I knew about a lot of stuff that was discussed. I am so thankful to the brothers who were with me on the mountain. The sense of brotherhood has changed my views about how I see life and what my purpose in life is. I came here a broken boy. I'm proud to say that I leave a complete man. I learned to accept myself as well as accepting the challenge of redefining my understanding of manhood. Today, I've learned that I should respect women because they are higher beings, goddesses with great powers, and that sex is not always the answer. I learned that some questions that I ask myself are the same with other men, Now I know that all of the issues that I have been faced with in my understanding of manhood, it is not only me. There are others like me. I've learned to be mindful and aware of colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and how they have destroyed the African community in so many ways. I learned a lot about sexuality, Africanism, loving our women, giving thanks. I enjoyed being in a group of men, not afraid to open up about my experiences. I realized that I have never been able to differentiate manhood from boyhood. I've always taken these things very lightly and behaved like a boy. Now I feel I'm motivated to grow into a man. I want you to, some of these statements can maybe sound a bit lighthearted, but I want you to understand how revolutionary they are at the same time. As men trying to navigate in a world that holds us to certain expectations that we very often do not learn tools to confront or to answer back to. So we live our lives very often in minus, meaning we are aware of what we are not, rather than what we are. And nature doesn't define itself by what it's not. Nature defines itself with whatever season it is. And as I'm immersing myself into nature, my being starts to grow. My being is reminded, my being starts to pulsate. There's a rhythm, there's a flow that I may realize that I have become very lost from. Just sharing our contact details there. And then I want to actually, I don't want to spend too much time, but there's a colleague of mine, and some may know her, Gogo Rutendo Ngara, and I hope that she's also lined up for a future conversation on this platform. She's an amazing scholar, and I asked her, as a healer, as a scientist, as a knowledge holder, and as somebody who holds many, many important responsibilities within African spirituality and knowledge, what comes to her mind? And I was expecting a sentence or two when she thinks of African men and mountains. She didn't just send a sentence of two. She actually sent this poem. And I think out of time, maybe I can find a way to post this so that I can send it to Mbali and then she can post it to you, so that when I'm going to play it, which is the next thing I'm going to do, because you might not hear every word very clearly, but I hope as I play the music, as I play the sound of her voice, and as I show you pictures of men in work, and I want you to remember what I'm saying, you will be looking at men who are working. And I want you to think about what that means when you watch these this collage. Let me call it a collage. So I want to, let me see, I want to share. I'm going here and I want to include the audio, and then I want to, let me see. You will stop me if something.
They stand as men on the mountain, strong, firm, elevated to see the day of the man. They stand as men that are the mountain, that can be elevated upon, who others can stand on their peaks, on their slopes, on their rugged exteriors, where others can climb as they remain steady, they remain firm, they remain rooted. As a mountain, they stand firm as the baobab of eons and ages. They stand firm in the knowledge of billions of years. They stand through the seasons, through the shifts of the winds, through the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the storms, through the parting clouds, through the rainbows, through the sunshine, and through the snow. They stand as men that are the mountain. They stand in stillness, in sturdiness, in rootedness. They stand as the cavernous interiors, the caves into which all life can take shelter. They stand as the crevices and the cracks that create pathways for volcanoes. They stand as that which buffers the earthquakes and protects against the ill winds. They stand as men that are mountains, with valleys below, with valleys that are replete and filled with all manners of nourishment, all grains, all leafy greens, all that seeks to serve, but they stand in protection of the valleys. They stand as those who are closest to the sun and therefore absorb his radiance as the radiance of Heru is. They stand as men of the mountain. They stand as the men that are the mountain. The men that are the mountain.
And there we come to a close. Men working, inspired by land. Ashe, thank you so much.